Hello and welcome to another installment of Theater House Profiles, in which I talk about Broadway theaters, their histories, and whatever other facts I can find about them. Today we're going to seize the day and head south of the theater district to talk about the Nederlander Theatre. This theater is located all the way down at 208 West 41st Street, with a capacity of 1,232 seats. It's currently owned by, of course, the Nederlander organization. Prior to that, it went through several other owners, as well as a few name changes. It's hosted hits, flops, and modest hits before gaining a lot of attention in the mid-90s with Jonathan Larson's magnum opus. It was also once home to a Disney show that told the true story of a band of ragtag street boys who fought against a man of power by standing up for what was right. While the true story behind its beginnings is vague, here's what I gathered up. The most common story behind its development and dawning is that Walter C. Jordan built the building over an indoor tennis court at a cost of $950,000, with designs by architect William Neal Smith. Other stories tell that it was originally a carpenter's shop that was converted to a theater later on. Shortly after the transformation from a workshop to a theater, a fire escape had to be built to comply with fire laws, hence why the fire escape doesn't seem to match the rest of the exterior. Its original interior was done in burnished Italian walnut with gold embellishments. Jordan was the building's landlord, but the Schubert brothers were in charge of booking, eventually buying the building in 1927. Under its original name, the National Theatre opened September 1st, 1921, with a seating capacity for 1,200 people. It was made to house both straight plays and smaller-scale musicals. Also, when this theater first opened, there were still plenty of other full-size theaters on the downtown side of Times Square. However, over the years, more and more theaters got the demolition treatment, and those other southernmost theaters were included. The National eventually became the southernmost outpost of the Broadway Theater District, and it still continues to hold the reign to this day. Even back then, as it was somewhat removed from the primary theatrical area of Midtown, that didn't help the shows it housed, but after a modest beginning, it eventually caught on and started hosting more outstanding productions. The National's opening show, Swords, the first play by Sidney Howard, was not a success and ran for only 36 performances. The following year, it housed John Willard's The Cat and the Canary, which had a much more successful run. The year after that, a production of Cyrano de Bergerac had a run at the National, produced by and starring Walter Hampton. Later on, Hampton would return to the National in a production of Hamlet. Harry Houdini himself later performed on the National stage in his magic show, Houdini Lives, in 1926. The remainder of the 20s would fill the National with more guest stars such as Frederick March and Anne Harding. In 1927, the Schuberts bought the building, and their control of Broadway was set in stone. When the Great Depression hit, by this time, the Nederlander had become so successful, it was immune to what the other theaters were going through at the time. Mei Lan Fang, Peking's most illustrious actor, played an engagement with his company from China in 1930, migrating from the 49th Street Theater. Right after that, there was a series of failures and quick bookings during 1932 and 1933, and was dark for more than a year. The Mercury Theater, under the direction of Orson Welles, presented Julius Caesar at the National on November 11, 1937. The 1940s were also good years for the National, one notable production being Maurice Evans and Judith Anderson in Scottish play. Lerner and Lowe's first musical, What's Up?, flopped, but they returned the following year with The Day Before Spring, which was more moderately successful. The National later closed out the 40s with a production of Caesar and Cleopatra by Bernard Shaw. The 50s were a good decade at the National, but in 1956, change happened. In the 40s and 50s, the Schubert organization was the subject of a U.S. antitrust investigation that ultimately led to divestiture of several theaters, this one included. The National was purchased by Harry Fromkes in 1956, who bought it as part of the settlement of the case. Shortly after that, Harry Fromkes died after a fall from his apartment, and his estate sold it to Billy Rose, who renovated it and renamed it after himself in 1959. One More with Feeling by Harry Kernitz was the last show at the National with its original name. On October 18, 1959, the Billy Rose Theatre had its grand opening with George Bernard Shaw's Heartbreak House. The following year, Katharine Cornell made her last Broadway appearance in Jerome Kilde's Dear Liar. In 1962, Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf premiered. As production on Broadway slowed, the theater went through more dark periods. 2 years after Virginia Woolf, Albee put on Tiny Alice. The show examined the theme of reality through a dialogue on religion. The writing was said to be confusing and difficult to follow, which is likely why it flopped. At the end of the 60s, Noel Coward's Private Lives had a revival. In the years after that, it would become home to a lot of British productions and imports. The Royal Shakespeare Company came to the Billy Rose in 1971 with Peter Brook's outrageous production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. Harold Pinter's Old Times hit the Billy Rose in 1971, which was also confusing and hard to follow due to Pinter not letting the audience in on his conceit, though it's since gained popularity. In 1978, the Nederlander organization and the British team of Cooney Marsh bought the theater. The following year, it was renamed the Trafalgar Theater. After another refurbishment, the theater opened with Brian Clark's Whose Life Is It Anyway?, followed by Betrayal, another Pinter play. In late 1980, the theater was renamed the David T. Nederlander Theater, the name it still holds to this day. After Lena Horne's one-woman show in 1981, the theater had a string of failures. Those failures include 84 Charing Cross Road, James Baldwin's Amen Corner, Peter Ustinov's Beethoven's 10th, and 2 shows based on popular children's literature, The Wind in the Willows and Raggedy Ann. Then, from 1987 to 1989, it housed the Times Square Church before the Nederlanders sold the Mark Hellinger Theater to the church's pastor, David Wilkerson. During this time, the area surrounding the Nederlander had become a shady part of town, and because of this, producers were afraid of having their productions put on there out of fear that they would flop due to the location. When the 90s rolled around, the Nederlander housed 3 failures. But that was all soon to change. After a successful run off-Broadway, Jonathan Larson's Rent was ready to hit the Great White Way. To prepare, the theater underwent a remodeling of the facade and the interior so that it would resemble a downtown nightclub. There was a hole in the ceiling at the time it moved in, but they opted not to fix it in order to add to the downtown nightclub atmosphere of the show. Of course, while they could keep it, it still needed to be weatherproofed. Jonathan Larson's Rent premiered on April 29, 1996, becoming a smash hit, a Broadway sensation, and would run at the Nederlander for the next 12 years. After Rent closed in 2008, renovations went underway for the Nederlander's next show. The interior was completely redone. Using old architectural photos of the space, they worked to the very last tiniest detail, getting it to look just like it did in the past, including the proscenium, the boxes, and the light fixtures, wanting to bring it back to its original design. When Guys and Dolls opened, the show played only 147 performances and was a box office failure when it closed. After that, Neil Simon's Brighton Beach Memoirs and Broadway Bound were to premiere at the theater in the fall and perform alternating shows. But due to weak ticket sales for Brighton Beach, the show closed November 1, 2009, and the planned Broadway Bound was canceled. Million Dollar Quartet followed afterwards and had a modest run. Then, in 2012, the Nederlander hit it big once again with Disney's Newsies. Based on the 1992 cult film of the same name about the newsboys' strike of 1899. It went on to become one of the most popular Broadway shows Disney has produced, running from March 2012 up until August 2014. Since then, the Nederlander unfortunately hasn't had a show as successful, but hopefully, Pretty Woman will be able to break the streak and run for more than a year. And with that, we've reached the end of this episode. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.